Good morning, everyone. First, we're gonna talk about the first voyage around the world by Magellan by Antonio Pigafetta. Ferdinand Magellan, February 3, 1480 to April 25, 1521, Portuguese explorer who organized the Spanish expedition to the East Indies from 1519 to 1522 to search for western route to the Maluku Islands, the Spice Island, resulting in the circumnavigation of the Earth completed by Juan Sebastian Elcano. Antonio Pigafetta, 1491 to 1531, Italian scholar and explorer from the Republic of Venice. He traveled with the Portuguese explorer Ferdinand Magellan and his crew by order of the King Charles I of Spain on their voyage around the world. His work became a classic that prominent literary men in the West like William Shakespeare, Michel de Montaigne, and Giambattista Vico referred to the book in their interpretation of the New World. His travelogue is one of the most important primary sources in the study of pre-colonial Philippines. His account was also a major referent to the events leading to Magellan's arrival in the Philippines, his encounter with local leaders, his death in the hands of Lapu-Lapu's forces in the Battle of Bagtan, and in the departure of what was left of Magellan's fleet from the islands. The first voyage around the world by Magellan. The document reveals several insights, not just in the character of Philippines during pre-colonial period, but also on how to fresh eyes of the European regard a deeply unfamiliar terrain, environment, people, and culture. Published after Pigafetta returned to Italy. Antonio Pigafetta wrote his first-hand observation and general impression of the Far East, including their experiences in the Visayas. In Pigafetta's account, their fleet reached what he called the Ladrones Island, or the Island of the Thieves. These people have no arms, but use sticks, which have a fishbone at the end. They are poor but ingenious, and great thieves, and for the sake of that we call these three islands the Ladrones Island. Ladrones Island, presently known as the Marianas Islands, it is located south-southeast of Japan, west-southwest of Hawaii, north of North New Guinea, and east of Philippines. Pigafetta reported that they reached the Isle of Zamal, now Samar, but Magellan decided to land in another uninhabited island for greater security where they could rest for a few days. After 2 days, March 18, 9 men came to them and showed joy and eagerness in seeing them and welcomed them with food, drinks, and gifts. The natives give them fish, palm, wine, which is yuraka, figs, two cochos, rice, and cocos. Pigafetta described what seemed like a coconut. This palm produces a fruit named cocho, which is large as the head, or thereabouts. Is the first husk is green and 2 fingers in thickness. In it they find certain threads with which they make the cords for fastening their boats. Under this husk there is another very hard and thicker than that of a walnut. They burned the second rind and make with it a powder which is useful to them. Under this rind there is a white marrow of a finger's thickness, which they eat fresh with meat and fish, as we do bread. and it has the taste of almond. And if anyone dried it, he might make it he might make bread of it. Very familiar and friendly. Willingly show them different island and the names of these islands. They went to Humuno Island, watering place of God's signs, where they found the first signs of gold in the island. They named the island with the nearby islands as the archipelago of Saint Lazarus. March 25, they saw two balangay. Balangay, a long boat full of people in Mazava. The leader, King Reyasagu, sent his men to the ship of Magellan. The king offered to give Magellan a bar of gold and chest of ginger. Magellan declined. Instead, Magellan asked for money for the needs of his ships. The king responded by giving them the needed provisions and food in Chinaware. Magellan exchanged gifts of robes in Turkish fashion, red cap, knives, and mirrors. The two men expressed their desire to become brothers. Magellan also boasted of his men in an armor who could not struck with sword and daggers. The king was fascinated and remarked that men in such armor could be worth 100 of his men. Magellan showed other weapons, helmets, and artilleries. He also shared his charts and maps and how they find the islands. Magellan was introduced to the king's brother, who was also king of another island. They went to this island and they saw mines of gold. The gold was abundant, that the parts of the ship and the house of the second king were made of gold.
Raya Kalumba, the king of Zulwan and Kalagan. The Gapita described him as the most handsome of all men that he saw in this place. He was adorned with silk and golden accessories like golden dagger, which he carried with him in a wooden polished sheath. March 31, Easter Sunday, Magellan ordered the chaplain to preside a mass by the shore. The king sent two of the digs and attended the mass with other kings. When the opportunity of the mass came, the two kings went to kiss the cross like us, but they offered nothing. And at the elevation of the body of our Lord, they were kneeling like us and adored our Lord with joined hands. After the mass, Magellan ordered that the cross be brought with nails screwed in place. Magellan explained that the cross, the nail, and the crown were the sign of his emperor, and that he was ordered to plant it in the places that he would reach, and the cross was beneficial for their people, because once the Spaniards saw this cross, then they would know that they had been in the land and would not cause them troubles, and any person who might be held captives by them would be released. April 7, 1521. Magellan and his men reached the port of Cebu, the largest and the richest of the island, with the help of Raya Calambo. The king of Cebu, Raja Humambon, demanded that they pay tribute as it was customary, but Magellan refused. Magellan said that he was the captain himself, and thus would not pay tribute to the king. Magellan's interpreter explained to the king of Cebu that Magellan's king was the emperor of the great empire, and it would do them better to make friends with them than to forge enmity. The king consulted his council, and the next day, together with the other principal men of Cebu, they met an open space, and the king offered a bit of his blood and demanded that Magellan do the same. Magellan spoke peace and God. People took pleasure in his speech. Magellan asked the people who would succeed the king after his reign, and the people responded that the eldest child of the king, who happened to be adulterer, would be the next in line. Parents were no longer taken into account and has to follow the orders of their children as the new leader of the land. People wished to become Christians through their free will and not because they were forced or intimidated. instead. On April 14, the people gathered with the king and other principal men of the island. Magellan spoke and encouraged the king to be a good Christian by burning all the idols and worship the cross instead. The king of Cebu was baptized as Christian. So the king and all his people answered that they would obey the command of the captain and do all that he told them. The captain took the king by the hand, and they walked about on the scaffolding. And when he was baptized, he said that he would name him Don Charles, as the emperor of his sovereign was named, and he named the prince Don Fernand, after the brother of the emperor, and the king of Mazava Jihan. To the more he gave the name of Christopher, and to the other each a name of his fancy. After 8 days, all of the island inhabitants were already baptized. The Gapita admitted that they were born a village down for obeying neither the king nor Magellan. The mass was conducted by the shore every day. When the Queen Haramihan came to the mass one day, Magellan gave her image of the infant Jesus, made by the Gapita himself. On April 26, Zula, a principal man from the island of Mactan, went to see Magellan and asked him a boat full of men so that he could fight the chief named Lapu-Lapu. According to Zula, Lapu refused to obey the king and was also preventing him from doing so. Magellan offered 3 boats and went to Mactan himself to fight Lapu-Lapu. When we reached land, we found islanders 1,500 in numbers, drawn up in the squadrons. They came down upon with the terrible shouts, 2 squadrons attacking us on the flanks, and the third in front. The captain then divided his men in 2 bands. Our musketeers and crossbowmen fired for half an hour from a distance, but did nothing, since the bullets and arrows through their shields made of thin wood, and perhaps wounded their arms, yet did not stop them. They arrived in the Mactan in daylight with 49 in numbers, while the islanders of Mactan were estimated to numbers of 1,500. The captain shouted not to fire, but he was not listened to. The islanders, seeing that the shots of our guns did them little or no harm, would not retire, but shouted more loudly, and springing from one side to the other to avoid our shots, they at the same time drew nearer to us, throwing our javelins, spears handed in fire, stones, and even mud, so that we could hardly defend ourselves. Some of them cast lance pointed with iron at the Captain General. Magellan died in the battle. The natives, believing that the bodies of the enemies were protected with armors, aimed for the legs instead. Magellan was pierced with a poisoned arrow in his right leg. A few of their men charged at the natives and tried to intimidate them by burning an entire village, but this only enraged the natives further. Magellan was especially targeted because the native knew he was the captain general. Magellan was hit with a lance in the face. Magellan retaliated and pierced the same native with his lance in the breast and tried to draw his sword but could not lift it because of his wounded arms. One native with a great sword delivered a blow in Magellan's left leg. It brought him face down, and the natives silently attacked Magellan with lance, sword, and even their bare hands, while the Indians were thus overpowering him. Several times he turned round toward us to see if we were all in safety, as though his obstinate fight had no other object to give an opportunity for the retreat of his men. The king of Cebu, who was baptized, could have sent help, but Magellan instructed him not to join the battle and stay in Balangay, so that he would see how they fought. The king offered the people of Magellan's gift of any value and amount in exchange of Magellan's body. but the chief refused. They, they want to keep Magellan's body as a memento of their victory. Duarte Barbosa is elected as the new captain. Henry Magellan's slave and interpreter betrayed him and told the king of Cebu that they intended to leave as quickly as possible. The slave allegedly told the king that if he followed his advice, the king would acquire the ships and the goods of Magellan's fleet. The two conspired and betrayed was theft of Magellan's men. The king invited these men to a gathering where he said he would present Jews that he would send for the king of Spain. 24 men attended while Pigafetta was not able to join because he was nursing his battle wound. The native had slain all the men except the interpreter and Juan Serrano, who was already wounded. The fleet departed and abandoned Serrano. They left Cebu and continued their journey around the world. From the original 5 ships set to sail, San Antonio, Concepcion, Victoria, Trinidad, and Santiago, only Victoria returned to Spain. And from the original 237 men only, 18 men survived. Analysis of Pigafetta's Chronicle. The best storyteller is the one who not only knows the story but to saw it. One of the most cited documentary historians who wished to study the pre-colonial Philippines. One of the earliest written accounts, Pigafetta was seen as a credible source for a period which was prior to unchronicled and undocumented. Earliest detailed documentation. It was believed that Pigafetta's writing accounts were the purest pre-colonial society. Pigafetta's work is of great importance in the study and writing of Philippine history. We should recognize certain bias accompanying the author and his identity, loyalties, and circumstances that he was in, and how it affected the next that he produced. We need to understand that he was chronicler commissioned by the King of Spain to accompany and documented a voyage intended to expand the Spanish Empire. A noble descent who came from a rich family in Italy. These attributes influence his narrative, his collections of details to be included in the text, his characterizations of the people and of the species that he encountered, and his interpretations and telling of the events. Being a scholar of cartography and geography, Pigafetta was able to give details on geography and climate of the places that the voyage has reached. Pigafetta's description to people was coming from 16th century European perspective. Pigafetta regarded the indigenous belief system and way of life as inferior to Christianity and of Europeans. He always remarks on the nakedness of the natives or how he was fascinated by their exotic culture. He was emphasized the natives' amazement and illiteracy to the European artillery, merchandise, and other goods. He repeatedly mentioned the abundance of spices like ginger and of precious metals like gold. When they saw indigenous attires of the natives, Pigafetta saw them as being naked because of European standpoint. They were wearing fewer clothes. Pigafetta's perspective was too narrow to realize that such attire was only appropriate to the tropical climate of the island. The same for the materials that the natives used, warehouses like palm and bamboo that would let more air come through the house and compensate for the hot climate in the island. We should understand that such observations were rooted from the context of Pigafetta and his era. In Europe, dominated by Holy Roman Empire loyalty and purpose, was domination of the Catholic Church all over the world. Other belief systems different from the Christianity were perceived to be blasphemous and barbaric, even demonic. 16th century European economy was mercantilist. It is a system measured the wealth of kingdom based on the accumulation of billions or precious metals like gold and silver. That's why Pigafetta always mentioned the abundance of gold in the islands, as shown in his descriptions, leaders wearing gold rings and golden daggers, and of gold mines. An empire like Spain would indeed search for new lands where they could acquire more gold and wealth to be on top of the European nations. The obsessions with spices might be odd for Philippines because of its ordinariness in the Philippines, but the understanding the context would reveal that spices were the care in Europe.
So, good day everyone. I am Mgec from Group 1, and I'm going to talk about the analysis of Pigafetta's Chronicles. So, the Chronicles of Pigafetta is one of the most cited documents by historians who wish to study the pre-colonial Philippines. One of the earliest written accounts, Pigafetta was seen as a credible source for a period which was prior unchronicled and undocumented. So it is one of the earliest detailed documentation, and believe that Pigafetta's writings was accounted for the purest pre-colonial society. So here are some context that should be used and understood in order to have a more qualified reading of Pigafetta's account. So should recognize certain biases accompanying the author, his identity, loyalties, and circumstances that he was in, and how it affected the text that he produced. So he was a chronicler commissioned by the King of Spain to accompany and document a voyage intended to expand the Spanish Empire. So he was a noble descent who came from a rich family in Italy. Second, has to keep in mind that he was coming from a 16th century European perspective. So whether implicitly or explicitly, regardless of the indigenous belief systems and way of life as inferior to that of Christianity and Europeans. So they would always remark on the nakedness of the natives or how he was fascinated by their exotic culture. He also noticeably emphasized the natives' amazement and illiteracy to the European artillery, merchandise, and other goods. The same way that he repeatedly mentioned the abundance of spices like ginger and precious metals like gold. So lastly is the quick summary. So Monesia. That's all guys. Thank you.
I am Lyle Piernado and I will present about the Kikiki and Katilya ng Katipunan. The kataas-taasan, kagalang-galang katipunan ng mga anak ng bayan was a Philippine Revolution group created in Manila in 1892 by anti-Spanish Filipino with the primary goal of gaining independence from Spain through revolution. And during the revolution period, Katipuneros built a complicated structure and define a value system to guide the group on collective striving for a shared purpose. Kartilya ng Katipunan was the name of the document. Kartilya ng Katipunan served as a handbook for prospective members of the group, outlining the party's regulation and principles. The title of the document was originally Lesson of the Organization of a Son of Our Country, and the Katipuneros Kartilya was a vital not just a Katipuneros but to all the Filipino at a period of when the country was under control of the great force and Emilio Jacinto regulations and responsibilities taught Filipinos that the only way to rescue the country and become a better Filipino. Changing Filipino attitude by avoiding negative habits and adhering to authorities' norms assist to avoiding negative habits and become a better citizen. Following in the Filipino footsteps of our forefathers is also very essential to us and to present a Filipino. So that's all. And next reporter.
Analysis of the Kartilya ng Katipunan. Kartilya ng Katipunan was meant to guide us in our living everyday life its fullest. More importantly, it highlights the importance of having the right attitude towards other people. Kartilya ng Katipunan was primarily written by Andres Bonifacio. Emilio Jacinto later made revisions, creating a new rulebook known as Decalogue. It served as a guidebook for newcomers, those people who are willing to join the group. The first tenet highlights the importance of living a purpose-driven life. A Katipunero who does not have purpose lives a useful life. The second rule is all about doing the right thing. A deed carried out for the sake of fame is not worthy of praise. The third tenet shows what kindness really means. True act of kindness for a Katipunero is in the love and service he renders to other people, and not the other way around. Fourth tenet highlights equality. Every Katipuneros are treated equally no matter what race or educational background he has. The fifth shows what honor should mean for a Katipunero. A true Katipunero values honor more than his personal interest. The sixth tenet is all about being a man of word. A Katipunero who has a sense of shame must be a man of his word. The seventh rule gives importance to time. A Katipunero must give importance to time. For the Katipunan, a time that is lost will never be back. The eighth tenet is all about fighting for what is right. A Katipunero must protect the weak and fight those who oppress the weak. The ninth tenet highlights the importance trust. A Katipunero is careful with what he says and keeps the things that must be kept secret. The tenth principle is all about being able to lead a family. A Katipunero must lead his family to the right path. If the leader is consumed by evil, so does his followers. The 11th principle is all about women. A Katipunero must give importance to a woman. He must not see her as an object, nor a pastime. That whenever a Katipunero sees a woman, he will remember his mother who nurtured him. The 12th principle gives importance to every action that one has to make. A Katipunero must not do things that he does not want to be done to him or to his family. The 13th principle is about having the right character. A Katipunero's life is not measured by what is his status in life nor with the things that he possesses. Instead, it is in his character and his love for the native land. And lastly, the last tenet shows a glimpse of what the author desire. It shows the sense of hopefulness for the motherland and that all the sacrifices made is not all for naught.